Today we're going to talk about maximizing the profitability from your tomato plants on the farm. My name is Nick, I'm with Bootstrap Farmer, and prior to coming here, I was a tomato grower from 2012 to 2018. That very first year, I did what everybody does, and I put in a lot of plants, a lot of infrastructure based off a lot of assumptions. At the end of that year, I had a conversation with Andrew Medford from Growing for Market magazine, who at the time was part of the trial farm at one of the major seed suppliers. And in that 1 hour, it completely changed the way I thought about growing tomatoes, the way I thought about the fruit, the way I thought about infrastructure, and really understanding what the plant does and what its purpose is. And as I've shared that throughout all the different farms I've visited over the years at Bootstrap Farmer, I just wanted to pack a very tight, condensed group of things that I think are the difference between just growing a plain tomato plant and growing one that pays for itself and pays for the farm and makes you money. So at the end of this video, I'm going to share my biggest takeaway from that, but let's get into all the details. So we're going to look at how to grow tomatoes for profit on a small scale. And we first got to start with why tomatoes. First of all, they're in very high demand as tomatoes are a staple in many diets and recipes. They're also versatile with many colors, sizes, and characteristic options. They also pair well with other crops. Now, if you're a farmer, you're looking for add-on sales, especially with high profit herbs. It's also a very versatile market. They're fresh, they do added value goods, they're great for restaurants, they're great for farmers markets. And if you are doing things correctly, you should have a surplus of tomatoes to go ahead and build in salsas and sauces and soups for off-season sales through canning and jarring. We also have added value products, which means less food waste with the ability to can and jar and extend the season that way. We also look at a very long growing season. So we have more opportunities to sell, more opportunities to be first at market, especially for starting our tomatoes in the wintertime and up potting and planting them almost fully grown out as the first frost goes away. And it's also a crowd favorite. You really can't look at a farmer's market without thinking about a tomato. It defines summer fresh, and it's a very familiar vegetable, and it's always a high market mover. Now, I want you to start thinking about making profit-driven decisions on your farm. Everything you do needs to have a purpose, and everything you plant needs to be able to pay for itself. So if we're looking at where to grow, you'll see these three little orange asterisks, and there's no way for me to cover all the variables. This is just a very high-level group of things I want you to think about. I'm going to lump up outside and raised bed gardening in contrast with growing inside of a hoop house. Now, of course, the upfront cost and the construction labor is going to be much higher for a hoop house, but our ability to control the quality of the soil, the amount of water, the ability to physically block pest and disease and protect against wind and frost all play a role in protecting against temperature fluctuations and things that could be detrimental to the plant over time. Now, if we take a look at the length of the season, if we're growing inside of a hoop house, we're in southern states, and if we employ heaters and things like that, and if we employ things in the summertime like fresh air induction, blowing the hot air out, some ventilation, some shading, we're also able to grow at a higher yield rate longer in the season, which means that you get many more pounds of tomatoes out of a hoop house than you would an outside or a raised bed. But it's not just the structure. We're also looking at greenhouse varieties. Now, these are varieties that are chosen over open pollination or over bush type, determinate types of tomatoes, in that we're growing on a single leader vine all throughout the season. Now, these varieties are optimized for controlled environments that's inside of a hoop house, and they offer higher yields, disease resistance, and consistent fruit quality. But they may lack some of the flavor that some of the other bush type or heirloom types are going to have. Now, the non-hoop house varieties are more adaptable to outdoor conditions, but they're also prone to splits and cracks and misshapes, and sometimes we're having a lot of germination issues and fruiting issues, especially if our weather is fluctuating. So we're trading off flavor for consistency, and when it comes to very finicky and picky farmers markets and the high demands of chefs, we may want to look at greenhouse varieties for a consistent crop. Now, if we're talking about inside of a hoop house, and even outside to some degree, the indeterminate tomatoes or vine crops are known for their continuous growth and fruit production throughout the season versus a bush type, which is going to put on all the fruit all at one time, so it's like a one and done. The benefits of proper spacing and air circulation mean that you're ensuring good airflow while reducing the risk of fungal diseases like blight and mildew. We also are able to have properly spaced plants to get more sunlight so they're not shading each other out. And this is especially important for photosynthesis and fruit ripening. We're also not competing for the nutrients available. So if we pack them in too tight and we're on a nutrient schedule, we may not be feeding the plants the proper amount, or we may be overcompensating and feeding them too much. It's also a lot easier to maintain, especially when we're looking at lowering and leaning and pruning, watering, and harvesting. Now, if we take a look at maximum yield without overcrowding, the spacing on the back of the seed packages is almost always going to recommend 24 to 36 inches, but from practical experience, I'm here to tell you that after year 2, after year 3, you're probably going to condense that down to 18 to 24 inches, depending on your situation. But I do like this 3 to 4 foot space in between the rows that gives you enough room for carts and for harvesting, leaning and lowering and all that kind of stuff. I also want you to think about soil testing early on in the season. And this is a highly neglected activity on the farm. I think a lot of people just assume that they can take a look at a plant and know what it needs the best. But if we analyze our soil, we can identify the composition and the nutrient levels and most importantly, the potential deficiencies. So this information can help you make more informed decisions, especially when it comes to pH balance, as tomatoes generally prefer a slightly acidic soil with a pH between 6 and 6.8. It also gives us the opportunity to properly amend and know exactly what we're short of or high on. We're looking at nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and trace elements. The most popular amendments we're looking at are compost for soil structure and just basic essential nutrients, bone meal for root development, lime, which helps raise the pH that tomatoes crave, plus a little bit of calcium for blossom end rot protection, and then a little bit of Epsom salt, which is good for photosynthesis and overall plant health. We also need to take a look at mulching, which is going to help retain the moisture at the root level, which means that the plants can properly transpire and grow tall and feed the tomatoes that are actually sucking in the water and making the fruit. It also helps control the weeds, which means the weeds are not competing for nutrient levels and it's reducing labor of pulling those weeds. It also helps regulate the temperature. So think of it like an insulation blanket that protects the root zone, which is more sensitive to extreme temperatures and fluctuations. I also want to take a look at, are we going to start from seed or are we going to buy seedlings? The price comparison, the overall thing I want you to think about is it's a little bit of an investment up front, but long term it's going to more than pay for itself in that no matter what, no matter if you're going to start from seed or if you're going to buy transplants, we really want to yearly plan this out. How many plants are you going to have room for? How much time are you going to have to prune and all that? And then is your market calling for? So a chef may be very specific on the size, color, shape, texture of a tomato. And then in general, your farmers markets, they like a red slicer, they like cherry tomatoes, grape tomatoes, that kind of thing. So make sure you ask people, especially your consistent buyers, what they're actually looking for and tailor that to those needs. Now, if you're starting from seed, you have the ability to select those specific varieties for that market for an indoor or an outdoor grow, and then the ability to custom grow for those needs. You also have the ability to up pot. Not that you can't up pot transplants, but we're going to get into up potting here in just a second. You also lower your ongoing yearly cost. Again, Bootstrap Farmer trays, they're going to last you year over year. Go ahead and make that investment once, and even if you have to buy more next year because you're growing up, the extra money that you're going to bring in from those tomato crops are going to more than pay for those yearly increases as you scale up. Most importantly, I think, is if you're doing indeterminate crops, especially in a hoop house, you're going to have to do a little bit of succession planting. And generally, I did it 4 times a year. Keep in mind, I was also growing year round, but most people are going to have at least 2 and sometimes 3 in a southern state, different succession plantings throughout the year. Now, if you're buying transplants, you're not going to have tomatoes available in the midsummer, late summer especially, because they're making room for different crops that are going to actually sell. Most homeowners, they're going to plant it, they're going to forget it, and they're not going to have to replant. So even if there are some available, which they're probably not, you're severely limited on the amount of varieties that they're going to have, and you're almost certainly not going to have a greenhouse variety. They're extremely seasonal, and let's face it, buying boring plants at a store is just going to make you sad. It's not a fun experience. Your seed starting tray options. So most of your farmers are going to start in cell trays in mass and quantities of 50, 72, 128, and 200. And what that allows you to do is, let's say you need 100 plants, a 128 cell will allow you 28 extra plants in case you have germination issues, in case you have a couple of runts here or there, or you break it as you're transplanting it out. You have a little bit of extras. And then you can take those extras and put them in something like a grow bag or something like a 6 cell or a 2.5 inch cup to sell at your farmer's market for some extra early income in the season. And for your smaller grows or gardeners, we also have 6 cells, 4 cells that you can plant directly into without having to plant so many. If you're doing anything less than 50, that gives you some more options. We also have air prune trays, which kind of give you a better rootstock to reduce transplant shock. And for the up potting situation, we have 2.5, 3.5, and 4 cells. That would be your first up potting option depending on your situation. And then if you have, let's say you're not going directly into the ground and you want to up pot again, especially in the northern states, you can go to a 5-inch pot for long-term up pottings, which means you're planting probably a pretty large plant, which likely has already have fruit and some flowers when you first plant that up to be first to market. And again, grow bags are another option. I mentioned them a minute ago about reselling, but this is also good for patio grows, apartment grows, flood zones in case you have early spring rains and you may need to move bags around. It gives you a good option. It's also good for rooftop gardening. Now we're going to kind of gloss over the up pot guide because we have a whole video that you can click this tab right here and it'll take you right to it. And we go into depth about starting in cell trays and working your way up to those larger 5-inch pots. And while you're on YouTube and subscribing so you don't miss anything moving forward, you can also go to our Hoop House Tomato playlist, and we have a very extensive series on identifying different parts of the tomatoes, pruning, lower and leaning, trellising, and pruning those tomatoes. And when it comes time to water, we are going to bottom water for the most part in the cell trays and up pot situations that you're working your way up through. And a lot of people, they always ask, do we need overhead or do we need drip irrigation inside a hoop house? And the answer is both. Because in the early part of the season, you're going to overhead water new transplants, which cover the entire floor of the hoop house, because the root zone is so small that a drip irrigation may or may not hit that root zone. So you're covering the entire situation. And as those roots grow out, you're going to switch from overhead to drip and just water the root zone where that plant actually is. Timers also save time and avoid forgetfulness, especially when you leave the water on. Happens to everybody. I also want you to consider when you're building your infrastructure, whether that be indoors or out, that you're going to need some type of trellis system for an indeterminate vine crop tomato. You can see in these pictures that some of these are very long. That's the lower and leaning that we talk about, and the bottom right picture is from that series that we talked about. So there's roller hooks and there's new items coming on the market that we will be carrying within the next year. But the main thing to consider is you have to grow these things up vertically to give your plants room to transpire and breathe and grow, and then to give you that harvest zone right at a convenient level for your body so you're not having to crawl around on the ground. Now, lower and leaning is a technique farmers use to lower the tomato plants and tilt them to one side as they grow. This is done to keep plants manageable and make sure they get enough light and air. As the tomato plants grow, they can become very tall and heavy with fruit. By lower and leaning, the farmers can prevent the plants from bending or breaking under their own weight and making it easier to harvest tomatoes and help the plants to stay healthy and produce more fruit. Another option that I see from time to time, but far less, is something called the Florida weave. And I'm just covering it here just in case you have those questions. And it's a method to support tomato plants as they grow. You'll also see this in a lot of peppers and bush type tomatoes. And basically you set stakes in the ground and tie strong twine or string between the stakes. As the plants grow, the twine is woven around them to keep them upright and prevent them from falling over. And again, that series that I mentioned a few minutes ago talks about developing the crown and fruit clusters, removing the suckers, which leaves to remove from the harvest zone, and how to lower and lean the stems. Next up is pest and disease management. Here is a tomato worm, and up next is the aphids. And we need to take a look at IPM, which is integrated pest management. Get used to hearing that. You're going to hear a lot of it as you're becoming a farmer. And it's a way of controlling pests in a greenhouse by using different methods that work together to keep plants healthy. integrated pest management. So it's a layer of, just like we talk a lot about layering up of different heat and cooling situations in a hoop house, integrated pest management is layering all that together. So instead of just using spray chemicals as most traditional big ag farmers are going to do, farmers use a mix of techniques like introducing helpful insects that eat the pest. You can use traps, keeping a greenhouse clean, and not giving these bugs a place to lay eggs is a huge part of that. And this reduces the number of harmful pests without harming the plants or the environment. It's also important because it keeps the plants safe and healthy while also protecting the people and animals in the greenhouse. We can also take a look at biological controls, which are natural predators like beneficial insects. I'm talking about ladybugs, predatory mites, and the very gross praying mantis. The most common thing you're going to see inside of a hoop house is mechanical controls like physical barriers, like screens and traps. We can also look at organic pesticides, and I know nobody likes that P word, but we're talking about natural ingredients like plants, minerals, or bacteria that help control pests without spraying synthetic chemicals. We're talking about neem oil from the neem tree, diatomaceous earth, Herbacillus thuringiensis, or most commonly known as BT. And again, this is just very high level stuff that I'm trying to cruise through. You can take a look on your own at some of those organic pesticides and draw your own conclusions. Up next, we're going to talk about harvesting for market. So to harvest, we're going to gently grasp and squeeze the tomato with your hand, and you're going to support the stem with your other hand to prevent it from breaking. I like to clip personally. A lot of people like to twist, but I find that clipping gives you far less bruising, far less damage to the vine itself. And then we're going to place the picked tomatoes carefully into a basket or container to avoid bruising during transport. The best time to pull a tomato from the vine is when it has reached full color for the specific variety. We're talking deep reds, oranges, yellows, or even purple depending on the type. The tomato should be firm, but slightly soft to the touch, indicating it's ripe and ready to be picked. Now, I'm going to put a little asterisk on that, in that this is if you're pulling on a Thursday or Friday to sell on Saturday. If you're having to pull and wait several days, you may wait till it's about halfway in color and let it ripen in a different manner that best works for your situation. After the harvest, we're going to store the tomatoes at room temperature and away from direct sunlight for optimal ripening. If we put them right in the middle of the sun, it's going to ripen faster. We're going to keep tomatoes in a single layer to prevent them from being crushed. We're going to use breathable containers like cardboard boxes or baskets. We don't want to seal these guys up. We're also going to transport them in sturdy, shallow containers to minimize movement and bruising, and avoid refrigerating tomatoes unless they are fully ripe to maintain their flavor and texture. Check tomatoes regularly for any sign of spoilage and remove that from the damage to prevent others from spoiling. When it comes time to selling your tomatoes, your market's going to determine that, but we're looking at farmers markets, direct sales, produce managers for stores, or a CSA model. And during your market research, as you're talking to your clients on each one of those, all you have to do is ask what they want. What qualities do you look for when selecting tomatoes? And a lot of these people probably have not even thought about that. So you're going to have to give them leading questions like, what flavors do you like? What textures? How do you use it? What colors are you looking for? What size? And how often do they purchase tomatoes and in what quantities? Especially for chefs that are going to be buying a lot more than what a general farmer's market client may buy. Rarely are they going to be able to give you very specific types or varieties, or they may give you a general answer. So maybe have something like a picture or maybe a seed catalog for them to take a look at. Ask them how they use tomatoes in their recipes or meals. So some are great for salsas, some are great for slicing and putting in salads. You need to know the difference. Also ask what improvements or changes would you like to see in the tomatoes that you offer after the sales or after you maintain a relationship with these clients or chefs. So again, farmers market, chefs, wholesale, CSA shares. And I put wholesale, it could be a store, it could be a school, it could be a butcher. Just because you're selling wholesale doesn't mean it has to be to a big chain or a big store. It could be a smaller outlet. And there's kind of two schools of thought on pricing strategy. So competitive pricing means that you're growing volume, sometimes under contract to wholesalers, ideally, so you know exactly how much to plant and plan for. And then you can tailor your option to scale that to the local markets or to those wholesalers. Or you can do premium product positioning, which is basically what I did, in that you only sell your tomatoes through added value products or ready-to-eat jars or meals, or you can custom grow, especially for chef needs. When it comes to marketing, I know farmers generally kind of shy away from that. We're all pretty introverted. Here's a couple things. Number one, from Paris Natural Farms, the most important thing you can do is put the location of your farm and constantly tag things around your town. Like this is in Paris, Texas. So tagging Paris, Texas, if people are looking for something, they're more likely to find you. They also have a link to their website, which gives more information. Here's an article in which I was featured in the Dallas Morning News about my gardens back in the day. You're also going to get asked to be interviewed and be on podcast. Take those opportunities. You'll get better at it over time. And also go out and be part of the local scene. Go to the restaurants. Go to different things around your community, especially around food or agriculture, and just be part of the background. That way people get a chance to talk to their farmer in a more casual setting. Okay, and now for some bonus tips to maximize the yield. Make sure, like I said in the beginning, to plant extra seeds. That gives you the opportunity to cull out weaker plants and have backups for at least a month. I always find that as you transplant these plants into whatever growing situation you're going to do, inevitably one's going to get stepped on or crushed or broke, especially if you start trellising up for the first time. So planting those extra seeds, you can get away from germination issues. You have backups. You can cull out the runts. Worst case scenario, you sell your extra transplants at the market or give them to a friend. Also take a look at succession planting and plan for that. Make sure that you're talking to your seed reps to make sure that they're not going to run out of seeds, and perhaps buy those and store them correctly so you have enough to get through the whole season. Work on that high density planting. Maybe not do it for every row in the beginning, but play around with some of that 18, 20, 24 inch spacing instead of the 24 to 36 to kind of get used to it. And I'm telling you, eventually you're going to get that denser without sacrificing some of that sanitation or IPM or photosynthesis stuff that we talked about earlier in the presentation. You also might take a look at interplanting with herbs. I kind of have mixed feelings with this. Some studies show that planting with different herbs enhances the flavor of tomatoes. It's also good to have herbs that are likely to be used with tomato dishes, but it also gets in the way of some of the maintenance items. So maybe find a corner or maybe dedicate one row, but it is something to look into. And now I'll get into what I promised earlier, which is the most valuable piece of information I got from Andrew that very first year, and that is how to prevent skin splitting. Now, my specific instance was I was growing sun golds, has a very thin skin. It was also everybody's favorite, but I did get a lot of skin splitting that first year, and his advice was to water 2 hours after the sun up and 2 hours before the sun down. Now, in the summer, I would also do a third watering right in the middle of the day, but he explained to me that the tomato's main function is to actually grow and live, not to make tomatoes, and that the tomatoes act as a reservoir for the plant of water. So if we're constantly watering or overwatering, that plant is doing what it does naturally, and it uptakes all the water it can because it never knows when the water is going to stop. And so especially overnight, when the plant tends to grow heavier because it's not in the stress of the day, the tomato is uptaking all that water and basically getting itself bloated and splitting that skin. And that made a huge difference for me and mine. I'm very glad to be able to share that with you. So let's review what we learned. A profitable season starts before you ever plant a seed. So that means planning, knowledge, and a little bit of patience, especially in your first year. You're going to get much better as the years go, but taking the time now to really take a look at everything that you can and be open to changes in that first year, and changing your planning as you go is a big part of it. And also, you can do this. Tomatoes are grown in every state by new growers, and if they can do it, so can you. And it's very fun to see new growers start and scale up as they go, and that's why we're here. So if you want more information, like, subscribe, hit that icon bell for more. Thanks for watching, and take a look at some of those other videos. Up next, in part of this introductory series, I'm going to cover how many pounds to plant. And we're going to look at that like on a bell curve as we compare and contrast different perfect growing conditions up and down the line. So don't forget to take a look at our Hoop House 101 series and then our pruning and trellising playlist. And we'll see you on the next one.